WrestleQuest is a turn-based RPG based on the wacky world of professional wrestling, but instead of taking control of real-life wrestlers and characters, though there are homages and also various presentations of wrestling personalities and wrestlers that do actually exist, from Jeff Jarrett to Conrad Thompson to the Road Warriors and of course to Macho Man Randy Savage. All of these characters and all of their representations is rooted in the fact that these characters are presented as toys. Not only as themselves, but also the environment is all rooted in a kid-like presentation that actually has a lot more maturity and depth when it comes to the story and the way it's presented than the aesthetics. You take control as not only Macho Man, an homage to Macho Man Randy Savage by a young toy that has grown up to want to be just like Macho Man, and Brick Logan, who is to a certain extent an Americanized version of Bret the Hitman Hart. And they are two sides of the same coin. Muchacho Man is a young, aspiring wrestler who actually believes that professional wrestling, quote-unquote, is real, that everything that happens in that ring is legitimate, whereas Brick understands what wrestling really is, and he's actually a second-generation star who finds himself not necessarily in the main event. He doesn't benefit from nepotism, as he is rooted in the low card of his family's business, and he wants to be more, just like Machacho Man. But mixing these two different worlds of professional wrestling also kind of hinders the overall story presentation, as you have this mix of reality and fiction in a fictionalized setting, instead of focusing on the idea of wrestlers trying to fight their way to the top and become these magnificent heroes and even villains. The ethics and morality of the narrative really evolves into what's happening behind the scenes more. This also hurts the battles themselves because you feel a majority of them are actually real fights. They're presented as real fights between even characters that are, like Brick, knowledgeable of this being a work. But then you have some of the bigger boss battles where there are necessities and criteria and objectives that are strictly rooted in the fact that their opponents are actually working together or attempting to, which may lead to a give and take situation where you may have to let your hype meter go down to less than 20% or have to survive a pinfall. And if you don't, it's actually game over. You will have to redo the battle all over again. There's also the various wrestling insider terminology that may go over the heads of people that don't know the quote-unquote smart aspect of being a professional wrestling fan or even being in the professional wrestling business. Considering the aesthetics, they could have kept this more rooted in reality, even though this is a fantasy world. It would have made the game even more absurd that you have these medieval areas or these wartime areas with toys who are trying to be the best professional wrestlers they can be. And even some of the backstage stuff could have been implemented while still being rooted in reality. The hatred between certain characters could have been rooted in the fact that this character is better than this character. That a promoter is looking at someone that is a potential future mega champion and maybe trying to push that person up the ladder a little bit faster to get to that moment, without it being the fact that this is all staged. This also adds to the fact that there is a karma system that comes into play during certain dialogue exchanges. And this karma system is not only helpful in getting hype, but also plays a role in certain characters having certain abilities and moves and skills and gimmicks available to them when the fights actually happen. There are also side quests that are available. 9 times out of 10 though, a majority of these side quests are randomized in terms of you finding them. They do have question marks on the map sometimes to showcase where a particular side quest could be activated, but then there will be other times where you'll just go to a random spot and interact with a character and come to find out there's a side quest. And some of these side quests, once again, are rooted both in reality and fiction. Some are very heartwarming and very real, very human. And then there are others where you just have to go out and collect certain items or put down some mutant bears. Now, the interesting aspect about this game, it is not a brawler. It is not a stereotypical wrestling game. As I noted at the beginning, this is a RPG. So you have RPG systems in a turn-based fashion. You can utilize just regular strikes or gimmicks, which are the special maneuvers of each character that you play with. Now these gimmicks can expand not only if you have a partner in performing tag team maneuvers or having a manager to help buff you and debuff opponents. As mentioned, there are side quests, and some of these side quests actually provide not only different items but also summons, like Andre the Giant. But in doing everything that you have to do, you have to make sure that the fans are involved, the fans are hyped, and that's where the hype meter comes into play at the bottom of the screen. As you are successful with attacks and taunts and gimmicks, your hype meter will go up, and at certain segments it will actually give you a buff, like more XP after you win the fight, or the ability to regain action points, which are the equivalent of MP or magic points in this game. So if you utilize gimmicks, your special attacks, they use AP. And if you get that buff of having AP regeneration, you'll be able to get AP, of course, after every turn. And you have the ability to taunt, which also buffs your character, but also lowers the defense for that round. And depending on your hype meter, there are certain special maneuvers or gimmicks that you can't even use until you get to a certain level of hype. Now, one of the more interesting and polarizing additions to the gameplay is the ability to follow up attacks or use defensive measures by hitting, depending on if you're playing with a controller, the face buttons like A, B, X or Y on the Xbox, or square, triangle, X and circle on the PlayStation. Or if you're playing on PC, using the arrows, left, right, up, or down, to pull off subsequent attacks or defensive measures. So for example, if you hit a regular attack, you can knock an opponent into the ropes, and when they come back, you can hit them with another attack if you hit the right button prompt. But if you miss, or hit the wrong button prompt, you'll be hit. And the same goes for defensive measures. You can be knocked into the ropes, but if you hit the button prompt at the right time, you can stop a follow-up attack. And there are also other special maneuvers that the opponents will do that you can actually stop a follow-up attack without being, of course, knocked into the ropes. Now, with some further updates, they actually have implemented the ability to turn off the QTEs, so when you get to the portion where the QTE would normally activate, it will automatically do so. It's pretty much easy mode for anyone that doesn't want to go through the headache of trying to do the QTEs and messing up an opportunity. Especially with some of the more important fights, as mentioned earlier, where you'll have to actually pull off a certain thing to make sure that the game progresses. Before major fights, you can actually cut a promo that is, of course, given to you with only a few selections of dialogue choices, but it does help boost your hype. And one of the big things players must also focus on when trying to boost that hype meter is what type of class or hype type that the playable characters have. Now, you can change these hype types at any time outside of battle. So if you're not feeling some of the cons that comes with choosing a hype type, like reduced normal damage output for the sake of being able to utilize taunts as a showman to get more hype during a match, you can switch that out after a battle. The same goes with entrances that can be changed before a big battle to up the ante when it comes to getting the most hype possible before the match even begins. Alongside the quick time events that comes with striking an opponent or trying to defend against an opponent is the pinning system. Now, the pinning system only comes into play when you're fighting human-esque enemies. And once you down an opponent, you have the option of pinning them. Now, the pin system is a little wonky with a sliding meter that at times didn't necessarily work like it's supposed to, where I felt like I hit the button prompt at the right time but it wouldn't register. And then there were times where I felt like I missed it and it did register. And if you don't pin an opponent before the turn is up, they actually revitalize and come back with HP. So it's imperative that you try to pin them when you have the opportunity so they do not come back, or fail the pinning combination, because if you do, of course, they will come back again. Of course, like every RPG, there are a plethora of items you can equip. There are upgrade systems, there's a crafting system. One thing I will note too, there is no randomized battles, so it is imperative if you want to stay leveled up to fight every enemy that you see. Now, enemies do respawn if you leave the entire area, if you go back to the world map and come back to that area, but they do not level up alongside you. So if you come to this area later on in the game, you will find that these enemies are very weak and do not provide much XP. Technically, the game can be rough. First playing it, it seems like a perfect game. It doesn't have really any flaws or execution problems. But as the game progresses, especially with some of the later patches, I've seen tremendous graphical glitches, including certain moments where you will go to a screen, leave that screen, and an outline of the previous area that you were in is overlapping the new screen that you're on, the area that you're currently occupying. I've had missed QTEs cause the game to pretty much freeze, where the button inputs will no longer load. I've hit the pause button during a fight and the game will freeze. I've had a few hard crashes here and there, and some of the quest points have actually disappeared if you failed certain platforming sections, including a very important narrative interaction late in the game. Frame rate drops and just general issues here and there have made this game quite stressful at times, and hopefully it's something that can be ironed out as the weeks progress, because it really hinders the overall experience if you feel that you will lose progress or just general stability problems, which is ironic considering the fact that this game was actually pushed back from its original release date because there was a save glitch that prevented people from saving their games as you got further along into the game. The aesthetics and the music are really good, though I will say that the audio levels when it comes to the voices during matches is really low in comparison to the music, so it's hard to hear some of the verbose dialogue from, say, Machacho Man when he's about to pull off his big grande splash. There is no fast travel when it comes to this game until very late into the game. So that means there's a lot of traversing because the map is really large. It's actually a lot larger than expected. So there's a lot of just walking around. Even with the run speed increase with one of the later updates, it's still a lot of backtracking, a lot of walking around across these big maps, going through areas that are now full of enemies that are very low tier, which creates one of those situations where it feels like time is being added to the game that is totally unnecessary if you did have fast travel. Overall, I feel that WrestleQuest is actually a very good game, a very strong game, a very fun game, even with all of its flaws. But there are some major problems, mostly rooted to the technical aspect that, once again, hopefully are ironed out as the weeks progress. The core system of the gameplay is very fun, very old school in a JRPG fashion, even though it does conflict with some of the narrative that is being presented because of this clashing with the reality of two people trying to become the best wrestlers in the world, but from two different avenues. One of the biggest positives about WrestleQuest is the fact that it is a budget title. It is only $30 and more than likely will have sales going forward, but for even $30, I still think it's a very good purchase. If you're a fan of turn-based RPGs, if you're a fan of professional wrestling, even if it gets a little too meta at times. But I will warn you when it comes to this game at this time, some 2 months after the release, that it still has technical flaws that hopefully will be ironed out, hopefully will be fixed, because those are the things that are really holding the game back from getting a full recommendation. But when everything is working great, when everything is flowing like it should, and you get the experience that I believe the developers really wanted you to have from beginning to end, WrestleQuest is as satisfying as snapping into a Slim Jim after hitting the biggest flying elbow drop.